And so really the two issues that I'll come back to a couple of times through the presentation today are in fact summarized here. This notion that interval training being superior to continuous exercise training, depending how you make the comparison, and the fact that interval training can be very time efficient. So really the 2 points that I would like to make today in the next 20 minutes or so are here. The first is what I call an apples to apples comparison, and that's if you compare a given dose or a work matched volume of interval and continuous exercise training. I think there's quite good evidence now to suggest that interval training can elicit superior physiological adaptations. The second is the apples to oranges comparison. This has been more of the interest in our laboratory, where we've been comparing relatively small doses of interval exercise training to the traditional approach. And I think there's fairly strong evidence now to suggest that you can have similar physiological adaptations, at least over the short term, lasting up to a couple of months. Obviously, when you talk about interval training, there's a very simplistic definition, which is just this, and that's that it's periods of more intense exercise separated by periods of recovery. Of course, the devil is in the detail, and you can make this infinitely complex. So on the one hand, it's just this idea of relatively hard effort separated by a period of recovery. But of course, even around that easy definition, there's lots of considerations, and this is from a nice pair of reviews that were published a couple of years ago in sports medicine. But even here, we're talking, how do you define intensity? What's the duration of the work interval? Are you talking active or passive recovery? How many series of intervals? How much time in between interval sessions? And to focus on one aspect of this, the intensity of exercise, there's lots of considerations as well. Is the intensity submaximal, and is maximal defined by maximal oxygen uptake or a work max test? You know, we often joke about those who study molecular mechanisms. We deal with an alphabet soup. When you talk about interval training, in many ways, it's an alphabet soup as well in terms of the various acronyms that are used. So I don't mean to oversimplify this, and those of you who are obviously coaches and athletes and interested in performance have to worry very much about all of these details and almost speak a different language when it comes to trying to optimize training for performance. I'm going to take a step back, though, and suggest that we might just want to simplify terminology, at least for the talk today. And we are proponents of the terminology that was suggested by Weston a couple of years ago in their British Journal of Sports Medicine review, working, of course, with Ulrich Wisloff. And so these are the terms that I'll use to frame the discussion today. So if we consider power output, and we equate VO2 peak as the power output that would generate maximal oxygen uptake. Of course, there's only so many ways to define moderate intensity continuous exercise, prolonged period of continuous exercise at a submaximal pace. So one type of interval training would look like this. And the definition suggested for this is high intensity interval training, which refers to relatively intense exercise, so above traditional moderate intensity exercise, but below that intensity that would elicit VO2 max or VO2 peak. Often these comparisons to continuous endurance training are based on a work matched or energy expenditure matched basis. I'll spend less time on that today, but I'm sure some of the other presenters will get into this a little bit more. The other extreme, if you will, then is sprint interval training. This would cover, of course, a wide range of intensities, but generally efforts that are performed in an all-out manner or at a relative intensity that's greater than the pace that would elicit VO2 max. So again, I'll anchor the presentation today based around this type of terminology, and so we're going to be talking about comparisons of SIT versus HIIT versus MICT.